guys, welcome back to Loft Sports. I'm Tyler.
I'm Seth.
Today we're going to be bringing you our SEC breakdown video, going over the top headlines, the biggest games, and then our predictions in the SEC. Alright, so let's get started with our top headlines in the conference this year.
Yeah, so really when we're talking about the SEC, the headlines we're kind of both talking about. Big thing is there's a lot of coaches coming into their second year, big expectations in some tradition-rich programs. You got Dan Mullen at Florida in his second year, who we're going to talk about in a little more detail. You got Jimbo Fisher at A&M, what's he going to do? Then at some kind of second-tier schools, you got Chad Morris at Arkansas. Can he get them to any sort of success? Even winning 4 games this year might be good for them. Tennessee's got Jeremy Pruitt. It's his second year getting his defensive system in place. We'll see what happens there. They could surprise people. And then you got Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State trying to take over that great program that Dan Mullen left for him there. And then we're talking SEC. You got to start at the top. Nick Saban, probably the best coach of all time. Is the dominance continuing? We'll see. And then the third storyline we have is the East is intriguing. There's 2 teams there, Georgia and Florida, and even Missouri with Kelly Bryant. There's a few teams there that could, make a splash and surprise some people. I'm excited to see what happens in the East this year for sure.
Definitely. All right, so let's get into some of the biggest non-conference games that are going to shape this league. The first one that comes to mind is a great rematch. This game was in College Station last year.
Yeah.
This time it's in Death Valley. A&M travels to Clemson. I think that's a big battle of 2 top 15 teams early on in the season.
Yeah, I mean, that itself, like you said, they played last year. Those are 2 teams looking to take. Obviously, Clemson's looking to continue dominance. A&M's looking to take a next step. That'll be a great early test for them. Moving on from that is one of the non-conference games I'm really looking forward to this year. LSU versus Texas. I really like LSU. I really like Texas. That'll be an intriguing game to see kind of who's already kind of peaking at that stage, who still needs a couple weeks to get going. That'll be a great game as well.
Winner of that game could very easily jump into the top 5 and have a very strong early position for a playoff spot.
Nothing beats early momentum.
That's
time
right.
of year.
Another game right out of the gate, Auburn against Oregon. I believe this game is in Arlington at Jerry World. Last year, Auburn beat Washington out of the Pac-12. Can they do it again against Oregon? I think that's very intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely going to be a game I'm looking forward to myself. I'm probably going to say I really like Oregon this year, too. You'll find out more about that in our Pac-12 video. But that's going to be a great game, too. I think that could be the case. Auburn could get exposed a little bit. As you'll see, I'm not too high on Auburn this year, high on Oregon. So see what happens there. I'll go ahead and let you take this next one.
This next one's going to be tough, but Notre Dame going on the road in between the hedges down to Athens against Georgia. Great atmosphere. We have a notorious reputation lately for getting blown out on the road against top teams in big games, but hopefully we can at least compete this time. So I'm interested to see that game.
How much of a chance do you think you have right now, if you could put a percentage on it, of pulling off a nice little upset there?
I would say about a 30 to 35% chance. I think that's fair. We were 12-1 a season ago. It didn't go very well for us in the playoff, but we did play some really good teams last year. I think we were better than the 2012 team that got beat by Alabama. And Clemson handled Alabama pretty good too. So I know there's some trash talk that's going to come there, but Georgia is a top 5 team. I think we can go down there. I think we do end up coming short, but no doubt that's one of the games of the season.
I think you come short by about this much. I think that's not going to be a good day for you. I'm sorry for you already. Closing out the non-conference games we're looking at there. Talking Florida, talking their 2 biggest rivals, Miami, Florida State. Those are going to be great games. They are what they are. They're historical. They got tradition. I'm glad they're playing them. Those are games that you just grow up watching, so it'll be nice to see those.
Yeah, kind of interesting. Florida starts the season with Miami and ends it as they always do with Florida State Thanksgiving weekend. Miami's going to be rebuilding, new head coach. But Florida State, year 2, as we'll get to in our ACC video, Willie Taggart era. But I'm expecting some big things from Dan Mullen and the Gators this year.
For sure.
All right, now let's get into some games that are going to actually shape the league in the conference. The first one that comes to my mind in the SEC West, well, there's really 2. They both involve Alabama. Alabama goes on the road to Texas A&M, where they have won, but they have won close games. Do you think that's going to be a chance for them to be beat this year?
I mean, you look at that schedule, which is a joke, by the way, like Alabama plays every single year. Nick Saban's one of the greatest coaches ever, also one of the greatest manipulators of what the SEC allows, but that's a whole different thing. Yeah, I see that as a potential hiccup, but I mean, we're talking A&M year 2, Jimbo Fisher, and we're talking Alabama. So could that be a potential hiccup? Sure, but I don't really see it. I think that's just business as usual for Alabama there.
Well, and then the other one is they host LSU, so this time LSU has to come to Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
I like LSU's roster. I think they always have some of the best talent in the country, but this one away from home, I think that's a dangerous spot for Coach O.
I mean, Alabama went in there last year, and I think the final score was 29-0 there in Death Valley.
That's right.
So, I mean, you look at that, and now you're going to Tuscaloosa. I don't know what LSU can do, but it's going to really show kind of if they've closed that gap in the West, which, I mean, right now it's been Alabama's for years and no sign of that slowing down.
That's right, and I think everybody's in agreement the game that's going to decide the East is going to be the largest outdoor cocktail party in Jacksonville, Georgia, Florida. Yeah,
I mean, Georgia and Florida, in between the hedges, it is what it is. Both teams are primed. That could very easily, when that comes around, could be top 5 game potentially too. Winner of that's probably going to decide the East, and you know the East, there's a chance that 2 teams could legitimately have claims until the very end of possibly being in the playoff race. So yeah, that's going to be a huge game for sure.
Yeah, Missouri with Kelly Bryant, definitely a factor now. Missouri was an 8-win team last year. They arguably at least say status quo at the quarterback position. They do lose Drew Lock to the NFL, but Kelly Bryant, I know he got beat out by Trevor Lawrence, but Trevor Lawrence is no bum. So Missouri is going to have some experience at quarterback. They do have a favorable schedule. A couple of their big games are at home, so kind of a 3-headed horse for the race in the East.
Speaking of the East, let's go ahead and get into our standings.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into our divisional breakdown. We'll start with the East. My number 7 place team is Vanderbilt. Derek Mason is proven himself as a good coach. He got Vanderbilt to a bowl game last year. I don't quite see that same success happening again.
I mean, it's Vanderbilt. It is what it is. They have a couple years where they got some solid teams, upset some people, but when we're talking a historic annual performance of a program, they're in that bottom tier of the SEC, and that SEC East is good this year. And they're teams that have been down the last couple of years that normally aren't, I think are climbing back up to where they normally are. So I think Vanderbilt's just getting, in case they're just getting left in the dust a little bit. So I have them as 7th as well.
Okay. My number 6 team is Kentucky, one of the surprise teams of the year last season. Won, I believe, 10 games, won a bowl game against Penn State. They do lose their top running back. Their quarterback is a glorified running back. Kentucky lost a lot on their defense, which carried them in some close games. I think Kentucky was a little bit lucky last year. I have them coming in at 6th. I think they do make a bowl game, though.
Yeah, I mean, Kentucky was a nice story last year. It was good to see them having some success, but are they going to be in around that same realm? I don't think so. They lost a lot of key players off that, and it's just hard to replicate that when you don't recruit at the same talent as some of the other teams in the SEC do. Good year, definitely something to hang your hat on as a program and try to keep that steady win. I think a bowl game is reasonable for them too, but I still have them 6th in mine as well.
Mark Stoops has done a great job at Kentucky, but I think I agree this year. I think they take a step back. I think it'd be surprising if they're even close to what they did last year. My number 5 team in the East is South Carolina. Probably disappointing if you're a South Carolina fan because with the returners they have, I think they return 8 players on offense and like 6 on defense. They're expected to do some things, but they have a brutal schedule. I think they go to Alabama, so I think they'll make a bowl game, but I don't think they're going to do much better than 6-6.
Yeah, I mean, as far as South Carolina goes, I think in Phil Steele's magazine, he has their schedule rated as number 1 most difficult in the country.
It's brutal.
It is what it is. They have tough non-conference with Clemson, like they play every year. Good luck. And then they travel, they get the bad matchups in the cross divisions. They go on the road to really tough teams. South Carolina's just not built for that right now. They're kind of in a rebuilding process. A brutal schedule doesn't help that at all. So I see them above Kentucky, but I got them at 5th too.
Yeah, I think they play at Clemson and maybe even at Alabama. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
The next team on the list is Tennessee. I think this is a very important year for Jeremy Pruitt.
Yeah.
But I think Tennessee, they have a favorable schedule. They return 10 players on the offensive side of the ball. Their defense is going to continue to get better with Pruitt, who is a defensive-minded guy. I think Tennessee wins 8 games this year and finishes 4th in the division.
Yeah, I mean, Tennessee's going to have a better year this year. I think they have to. Tennessee's too good of a program historically to keep going 5-7. Pruitt in his 2nd year. Changing the defense around is a big deal. Getting his scheme in place, it should help this year. Defense helps win games when your offense is still kind of chugging along, getting used to new systems. They do have a little bit easier schedule than South Carolina. That's why I kind of have them where I have them there, just above South Carolina there. But I got them for too. I think our lists are probably going to end up probably identical here in the East.
Probably so. And one last thing on Tennessee. It's been a while for them. Proud fan base.
Yeah.
Historically, they're one of the top 20 programs out there, so I wouldn't mind seeing them kind of get back to relevance. I know they had a couple of years with Butch Jones, but those were really disappointing years because Tennessee they haven't been to Atlanta in a long time.
Yeah. I just to kind of follow up on that, I mean, Tennessee, I'd have no problem seeing them back. I mean, they were a team that was relevant late 90s, early 2000s, won a national championship.
Very relevant.
Great fan base, too. Some similarities to Nebraska in a lot of ways between the fan bases and everything there. So that's a traditional team. I'd love to see them back on top, same as you.
Number 3 for me is a little bit of a surprise team. Missouri did win 8 games last year, but Kelly Bryant comes over. Missouri has a pretty nice schedule. They get Florida at home. They don't really play anybody in the non-conference. I think they take a trip to West Virginia, who's completely rebuilding. I think Missouri can win 9 games this year.
And when you look at their schedule, too, I mean, from the West, they're pulling, I got it written down here, Arkansas and Ole Miss. I mean,
very favorable crossover.
Of the 2 teams in the West, I'm curious to see where you have them in your standings, but those to me are the 2 bottom teams in the West. So pulling those is going to help, too. Getting Kelly Bryant, he's a proven winner. He's played in a lot of big games for Clemson. Missouri's not that bad of a team. They've had success. So, I mean, hopefully they continues. Will close the gap just for a little bit more parity in the SEC. But those are one of the East teams that are really intriguing. I have them as number 3 as well.
All right, number 2 on my list is going to be a little bit surprising, but I think it's Georgia. I think Georgia goes 11-1, but I think they lose to Florida, and therefore that gives Florida the head-to-head comparison. I actually have Florida winning my division in the East. I have them going to Atlanta. I think their only loss is going to be at Missouri. It's a road game. I think Missouri's going to be a really good team, but I don't think Missouri's going to win all these games. And as good as I think Florida will be, I look at their schedule, and I think they'll beat Georgia head-to-head. But I'm looking at their schedule, and I'm saying there's no way this team is good enough to run the table. They've got to lose to somebody, so I settled on Missouri. Yeah. Georgia is a national championship caliber team.
Absolutely.
They have loaded NFL roster, just waiting for draft picks next spring. Yep. But I think at the end of the day, that head-to-head tiebreaker, if Florida can avoid losing to LSU on the road, which is probably their next biggest game after the Georgia and Missouri games, I think Florida wins the East.
So, I mean, just to kind of go slight rebuttal there, I mean, I really like Dan Mullen. He's one of my favorite coaches. I'm very curious to see what he does here at Florida, given better resources than Mississippi State. I don't think they're there yet. They're a great team. I actually think they're going to end up being the third best team in the SEC. But I don't trust the quarterback. And when we're talking about the SEC, that's what wins you games, defense and quarterback. They have a good defense. They have good skill players. And I do agree with you. I do think they beat Georgia because I think Dan Mullen and Florida really need that win. But I see him slipping up somewhere else, whether that's LSU or maybe even another team that comes out the radar. I don't trust them yet as much as I like Dan Mullen. If he had a little bit better quarterback, I could see that. But to me, Georgia's ready to win a national championship. They have a veteran quarterback. They reload on defense, skill positions all over the place. DeAndre Swift's back. That team is ready. And losing to Alabama, SEC championship last year, national championship the year before. I think they're ready to take a next step, and I think they're going to catch Alabama at the right time this year too when they meet in the SEC championship game.
Bit of a spoiler. Okay.
So I got Georgia winning the East. Florida very close second though. Florida, it could very easily be flip-flop. I just don't see it that way. I just don't trust the quarterback. I'd rather take the 3-year starter over a guy who's year 2 in a system.
Fair enough. I think Franks takes the next step. Dan Mullen is a quarterback guy. He got Dak Prescott to Starkville, and he got that other kid. His name escapes me. Fitzpatrick. Yeah. Mississippi State was a team that really should have been 4th or 5th place in their division, and he had them ranked number 1 in the country for a little while. So I think Dan Mullen is going to take Florida to the next level because of the talent, and I think this year it might be a little bit ahead of schedule, but I got a strong feeling about Florida.
No, I have no issues with what you're saying. I love Dan Mullen, one of my favorite coaches. Personally, that's what I'd like to see happen. Like I said, I just don't trust it yet.
All right, we'll get to the West here in just a second. My last place team, I don't want to spend a lot of time on them because I just don't think they're going to even win a game in the SEC this year. That's Arkansas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. They were 2-10 last year. Is it really going to get much better? Probably not. Sorry, Razorback fans. It's just where you're at right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think Morris will be a coach that will maybe make some strides, but in this division is probably the toughest in college football. I don't see them winning a game.
Yeah.
My next team in the 6th spot is Ole Miss. I think because of the bowl ban and everything that's going on with that program, naturally, I just don't think they have the talent right now, and I think their schedule, just like Arkansas, they're not ready to compete. I think they miss out on a bowl game.
Yeah, to keep it short with Ole Miss, I have them at 6-2. A lot of the same things you said. They're reloading. They're just not there yet. A couple years, we'll see, but right now, I don't really see them being a factor, so 6 as well.
Number 5 for me is Mississippi State, a team that Dan Mullen really turned into a winner in Starkville.
Yeah.
The overflow, to show how good of a program he's created, they had an overflow where they still won 8 games last year, but now their quarterback is gone. They lose a lot of those guys. It's year 2 of a new coach's era. He's kind of trying to build things a different direction. I think they go 7-5 and make a bowl, but I think you're going to start to see them slide back to earth a little bit.
More importantly, Mississippi State, this is year 2 without Dan Mullen's culture, not just a new coach, his culture that was so successful. Kind of doing still some of the same things, but it's not going to be the same. I think Mississippi State's going to go on a couple-year decline here from where they were at until Moorhead's able to rebuild with players he wants. I see him slipping this year at 5-2. Not much else to say there.
Number 4, only because I think they'll beat Mississippi State head-to-head, but I think they're going to have one of the most disappointing seasons of any Power 5 team. That's Auburn. They start with Oregon. That's a really tough non-conference matchup. If they lose that, I think they got LSU a little earlier in the year this year.
Yeah.
It could get ugly early for Auburn, and for a fan base that's really kind of been squawking for Gus Malzahn's job, he got an unjustified, to some degree, contract extension a couple years ago when they made a magical run and won the West, but they fell apart down the stretch, lost to Georgia in the SEC title, lost to UCF in the bowl game. I think this could be Gus Malzahn's last year if it unravels like I think it could. I have Auburn at 6-6.
Yeah, I mean, I have them as my number 4 team too. I see them having a really bad year by their standards. I think if they lose early to Oregon, pressure starts mounting. If they lose that earlier matchup to LSU, it gets even worse because that's in conference play. I think eventually it's going to become too much of a distraction. I do think this is Malzahn's last year there. He's had plenty of opportunity. He's got one of the best areas to recruit in the country. Alabama has endless talent. You're right next to Florida. You're near Georgia. You're right where you want to be as a coach as far as a talent pool. He's just not doing it. He's going to have a redshirt freshman quarterback starting this year who was highly rated, in Joey Gatewood. Redshirt freshman quarterbacks in the SEC don't do well. I mean, this ain't Johnny Manziel we're talking about here.
It's not. And another thing about Auburn is he's an offensive guy. They brought him in to turn that offense around.
The defense is almost better than the offense.
Their defense has been stout, but they can't score. I mean, they had Stidman in there, who was a quarterback transfer from Baylor. Everybody thought he was going to do some things, and they just haven't been able to get over the hump. And they're nowhere close to even beating Alabama and some of the other top teams. My number 3 is Texas Texas A&M. I think they're going to have a really solid year. I think Jimbo Fisher is going to make Texas A&M a contender. As Saban maybe phases out, it could transition to where maybe it's A&M and LSU at the top of the West for a long time. But
interesting.
A little bit of a sneak preview maybe to years to come, maybe.
Interesting.
But we're not to that point yet. I think A&M can win 8 games. I think this is the best chance for Alabama to lose is when they go to College Station and play A&M on the road. I don't think it happens. A&M plays Clemson and Alabama this year, so I think those are 2 losses. But other than that, they go 8-2 in those other games. I think that's good enough for a third-place finish.
I think the biggest difference with A&M this year, they go to Georgia, they go to LSU, and then really those games are back-to-back on their schedule to close it out. Tough end-of-year stretch. I don't think they're as good as LSU or Alabama yet. I do agree that's probably the one team that could beat Alabama, but honestly, I just don't really see it happening. A third-place finish in the SEC West, though, this year with as good as Alabama and LSU are, that's right on par with where Jimbo Fisher needs to be, as long as those games are probably a little close. Losses that fan bases can handle is what I'm saying, not blowouts. I think that's all you can expect from A&M right now until he gets more talent there. And
the losses to Clemson and Alabama last year weren't egregious, especially the loss to Clemson. The game was, I think, a 2-point game at the end. So.
Especially considering it's year 1, too.
Correct.
So he needs to make that jump. Alabama and LSU are really freaking good. That's just the bottom line.
LSU, I think, is going to finish second. I think they win 9 games, maybe get to another New Year's Six bowl potentially with that record. They're just not ready to take down Alabama. They're good enough to beat everybody else. I don't think they're going to beat everybody else on their schedule, but they're good enough to. Burrows is a good quarterback. He's good enough where if Alabama wasn't as dominant as they were, they could win the SEC. But I think LSU, they go to Texas early in the year. They got to go to Alabama. Of course, they play A&M and Auburn and the other teams, and Florida's their crossover rival. That's a tough schedule, and I think Coach O is a good coach, but I don't think he's as good of a coach as LSU should have, if that makes sense for the talent that they pull. I think LSU finishes second.
I think that's the thing right there, talking about Coach O. He's a recruiter. Maybe not necessarily the best developer in the world. I mean, his quarterback right now is a transfer, so it's not like it's his guy. A lot of times the key of a program is when you get your guy, you hand pick him, you develop him and have success with him. You can't win off transfer quarterbacks
especially
all the time.
when you're LSU. If you're a team like Purdue or somebody in that Arkansas level, but LSU should be able to recruit and get 4 and 5-star quarterbacks.
They play a pretty friendly quarterback system. I know they're not spread or run and gun really much anything like that, but they play in a very quarterback-friendly system. You have elite receivers normally, from a talent perspective, for what they recruit. Usually big physical offensive lines. They can run the ball well, set up play action, which is what they want to do. They should be able to find better. I like Burrows. He's one of probably more of my favorite quarterbacks in the country, but they're just a step down right now in the West. And there's nothing wrong with that with the way Alabama's going, but it'd be nice if they closed the gap a little bit more.
And then number 1, Alabama. 12-0, 8-0 in the conference. Don't think twice about it.
Nick Saban, enough said. They don't play anybody tough other than at A&M. And, of course, just like every year, they play a freaking high school team before Auburn. So, whatever. 12-0. Business as usual for them.
I agree. All right. So, going into the conference championship game now, I have Florida winning the East and Alabama winning the West. I don't think the conference championship game will be close. I think it'll be very similar to the McElwain days when Florida went back-to-back years and Alabama pretty much handled them. So I got Alabama over Florida in the title game.
If Florida actually does win the East and plays Bama, I think it's going to be closer than you think, because you have to remember, Mississippi State played Alabama pretty tough a couple times. Mullen knows the system. He's found ways to have a little bit of success with better talent. Maybe that gap
I don't know that talent is
more
there yet, though, for Florida.
That could very well be the case. I just don't think they're going to get boat raced if they play them. Now, as far as my pick of the SEC championship game, Alabama, Georgia, I think, honestly, Alabama... I look at Alabama's schedule, and Auburn's not a good enough test, and A&M is in year 2. I don't think they're going to be physically and mentally prepared for the sucker punch that Georgia's going to give them. Now, that's happened the last 2 years. The last 2 times they've played them. Georgia's been up and let that lead slip. I think Georgia finishes it this year. I think it's a close game. I don't think it's a blowout or anything like that.
The question is, does Alabama have a backup quarterback they can put in the second half to take Georgia out?
Probably. I mean, who knows with them? They'll probably just pull a kid out, like
Of the
water boy
stands.
style,
Yeah.
and everything like that, and he'll run for 200 yards. Who knows? But I do have Georgia beating them this year.
Really?
I actually will get to it a little bit. I really like Georgia this year. They might be, I think, the only team that I think could possibly take down Clemson, but we'll get to that in another video.
So you have Georgia winning the SEC.
I do.
Obviously, they would make the playoff then.
Yep, and I think just due to Alabama's record, their nature, they'll be in the annual Nick Saban Final Four again.
I actually agree. I have Alabama in the playoff as the SEC champ, but I also have Georgia at 11-1. The way my playoff works out, I'll explain it more because we got some other videos. I don't want to get too in depth and spoil the other conferences, but I have Alabama in as the SEC champ, and I have Georgia in as the 4th team. Even though they're not a conference champion, I think their win over Notre Dame is going to do them a lot of favors going down the stretch, and they'll also collect some other wins. Georgia Tech might be a so-so team, but it'll still be another good non-conference win. I think Georgia and Alabama both get in.
And let's be honest, too, it's not like Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, if they're all right there at the end, they're probably all going to be right around the top 5 anyway. A couple other teams lose. It could shake out that way. That's an interesting thought. I wasn't really thinking to go there with it. I thought you'd have Florida with that, but that's how it falls sometimes.
That's the way I'm feeling it. All right, guys, we're going to come to you next time with our ACC video. Thanks so much. This is Loft Sports signing off.